Seeking shelter from a fierce tornado, Claire finds herself in an old, isolated barn, only to be confronted by an older man named Thomas. As the storm rages outside, Thomas seems unnervingly fixated on her, his gaze lingering in disbelief. When he pulls out an old, weathered pocket watch and shows Claire a photo of a woman who looks startlingly like her, a chilling connection begins to form. With no explanation, Thomas insists that she looks exactly like his long-lost wife, who disappeared during a storm years ago. As Claire's confusion deepens, she realizes there's more to this encounter than a mere coincidence. Welcome to Limelight Tales. Let's begin with this story and discover how a chance encounter in a stormy barn uncovers a hidden connection that will change everything. The tornado howled like a living thing as Claire sprinted through the open fields, her coat flapping wildly in the wind. Her car had broken down on the lonely stretch of road a mile back, and the barn was her only refuge. Stumbling through the doors, she slammed them shut behind her, panting for breath as the storm raged outside. The barn was dimly lit by flashes of lightning through the cracks in the wooden walls, revealing an assortment of old farming equipment and bales of hay stacked haphazardly in the corners. Claire leaned against the door, trying to calm her racing heart, but her unease grew when she noticed how eerily quiet it was inside, as if the storm had been swallowed by the barn's heavy silence. She took a few cautious steps forward when the door behind her creaked open again. Spinning around, she came face to face with an older man, his weathered face pale and drawn. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp but edged with something Claire couldn't quite place. Fear? "I'm sorry," she stammered, holding up her hands. "My car broke down, and I needed shelter from the storm. I didn't mean to intrude." The man didn't respond immediately. His eyes roamed over her face, his expression shifting from irritation to something akin to disbelief. "Who are you?" "Claire," she said, confused by his reaction. "I was just passing through on my way to Denver." The man didn't seem to hear her. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out an old, tarnished wallet. From it, he removed a small, faded photograph and handed it to her with trembling hands. Claire stared at the picture, her breath catching in her throat. It was an image of a young woman standing in front of this very barn, smiling brightly. The resemblance was uncanny. It was like looking into a mirror. "Who is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. The man hesitated before answering. "Her name was Grace. She was my wife. She died here 30 years ago, during a tornado just like this one." Claire felt her stomach drop, her mind racing to make sense of what he had just said. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, handing the photo back to him. "I've never been here before. I don't know her." The man studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Grace was pregnant when she disappeared," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "She was 8 months along. We never found her body, or the babies." Claire's skin prickled with unease. "I don't see how this has anything to do with me." The man's eyes narrowed. "You look just like her, and you show up here, of all places, during a storm like this? That's not a coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidences either," Claire shot back, her fear now mingled with frustration. "But I'm not her, and I don't have any connection to this place." Before the man could respond, a loud crash echoed through the barn as a gust of wind tore through a section of the roof, scattering debris everywhere. Claire ducked instinctively, shielding her face, and when she looked up, she noticed something strange. In the corner of the barn, partially hidden beneath a pile of hay, was a trapdoor. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. The man followed her gaze, his face going pale. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "Just an old storage area." Claire didn't believe him. Ignoring his protests, she crossed the barn and pulled the hay aside. The trapdoor was heavy, but with some effort, she managed to lift it. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. "I wouldn't go down there if I were you," the man warned, his voice tight. "Why not?" Claire challenged. "Because there's nothing down there but pain," he said, his eyes haunted. Claire descended the steps anyway, her curiosity overriding her fear. The air grew colder as she reached the bottom, and she found herself in a small, dimly lit cellar. Old tools and crates lined the walls, but what caught her attention was a large wooden chest in the center of the room. She knelt down and opened it, revealing its contents: baby clothes, a journal, and a stack of letters tied together with twine. The man had followed her down and now stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Those were hers," he said softly. Claire picked up the journal and flipped through its pages. Grace had written about her life on the farm, her excitement about the baby, and her fears about the growing tension between her and her husband. One entry, written just days before her disappearance, caught Claire's eye. "Thomas is hiding something. I found the money in the barn. If he thinks he can get away with it, he's wrong. I have to protect our child no matter what." Claire turned to the man, realization dawning on her. "You're Thomas," she said. "What was Grace talking about? What were you hiding?" Thomas's face darkened. "That's none of your business," he said, his voice sharp. "It is my business if I'm somehow connected to all of this," Claire snapped. Thomas took a step toward her, and for a moment Claire thought he might lash out, but then his shoulders slumped, and he sank to the ground, burying his face in his hands. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I got involved with the wrong people, borrowed money I couldn't pay back. Grace found out and threatened to leave me. That night, during the storm, they came to collect what I owed. Grace tried to stop them, and she got caught in the middle." Claire's blood ran cold. "What happened to her?" "I don't know," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "The tornado hit, and when it was over, she was gone. I looked for her, but it was like she vanished into thin air." Claire stared at him, her mind reeling. Could it be true? Could her biological mother have died that night, leaving her as an orphan? Before she could say anything, the storm began to subside, and a strange calm settled over the barn. As Claire and Thomas emerged from the cellar, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. Claire turned to Thomas, her expression a mixture of anger and sadness. "You didn't just lose Grace that night," she said. "You lost your child, too." Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face. "If you really are my daughter, I'm so sorry. For everything." Claire didn't know what to say. She felt a mix of emotions: anger, grief, and a strange sense of closure. She didn't know if she could forgive Thomas, but for the first time, she felt like she understood where she came from. As Claire walked away from the barn, the morning sun casting long shadows over the fields, she reflected on the twists of fate that had brought her here. She had always felt something missing in her life, a gap that no amount of success or comfort could fill. Her childhood had been a haze of foster homes and uncertainty, a constant search for belonging. Now, standing in the wake of this revelation, she realized she had been running from the past for far too long. The truth she had uncovered was painful, but it also brought clarity, a chance to confront the past and decide her own future. She wasn't sure what to do with the knowledge that Thomas might be her father, or what this meant for her identity. But one thing was clear: she had the power to shape the next chapter of her life. Life, like the storm, was unpredictable and relentless. But just as the tornado had passed, so too could the weight of old wounds. The journey ahead would be hers to shape, a testament to survival, resilience, and the power of uncovering the truth. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories to life.